What's happening, guys? Phil here, talking about Daggerheart again, and I really wanted to just talk about balance in Daggerheart, specifically like how hard should you be going at getting resources down for the players, how close to them doing a death move are you trying to get them, that kind of thing. And I also talk about how I like to spend fear and think about fear usage in and out of combat. This video is a mix of footage from a live stream where I talk about it, I didn't want to just repeat myself, and also intercut with some more talking head stuff like this where I have some other perspectives. Also, guys, I'm streaming a lot more on Twitch talking about this. If you want to just chat about Daggerheart, or if you've got any, concerns or questions, come to Twitch. I'm probably live right now, especially if this video just went live. And yeah, thanks. Bella, you don't have much experience DMing Daggerheart. You had maybe 6 sessions. I still need to get a feel for how much I can wear down resources without making it deadly. I tend to hesitate because HP is so low. It can be hard to figure out exactly how harsh you should be being. My story here is that when I first started GMing Daggerheart, I have 2 stories where I went too far. One of them is my players never seem to be bloodied. Right? They always seem to have a lot of HP, even when I was throwing a lot at them. So I started to increase the difficulty over and over and over again. And I thought I was still doing fine. I thought I was still in a good balance. And then I had a game where it was a new player. They'd come into it. They were playing Wizard, which is kind of squishy. And it was a few sessions in, and I was throwing out this high damaging stuff. And I was looking at their stuff. I kept asking them, how much HP do you have? How much whatever? I could see their resources. And I was like, I'm not doing enough here. They still have tons. And it got to the point where I had broken all the armor slots of the Wizard, but he still had full health. And then I went another 2 rounds of attacking the area. It wasn't going for him, I was just attacking the area, and the Wizard was just like, I'm dead. And that's kind of my experience here, is that it may feel like you've barely touched one of the PCs. It can feel like they've still got tons of resources, but actually 2 or 3 heavy hits and they're done. If you can get the armor slots down, or if you can get something down, or if their stress is all the way up, so now they take HP when they take stress, it can turn on them really easily. And I end up killing that Wizard, and they took the Blaze of Glory death move, and it was awesome. It was an awesome narrative beat. But since then, I've always been like, man, why did I go so hard? I was so confident that no one would die. I was in my mind, I thought I understood, but unfortunately, in Daggerheart as a PC, you can go from everything is fine to I'm on death's door like that. And then there's no safety net. There's no death saves. Healing isn't as easy to come by as other TTRPGs. So yeah, that was the first time where I was like, okay, I just learned a valuable lesson about balance here and pushing it too far. It can be hard to tell sometimes. What's up, guys? So I wanted to jump in with just an extra one here, because I say I had 2 stories in this live stream. I actually had a third better story. So before we get into the second one, I just want to tell you about this one time, because I think it adds a lot of context, where I was GMing this big final boss battle, and I was in that mindset of I want to really get rid of the resources here of my players. I want them to sweat. I want them to feel close to death, but I don't want to actually, get anyone to 0 HP. I don't want any death moves here. So the battle's ongoing. I'm spending fear. We're having fun. The players are having fun. I think I'm getting them low. And this was early on. This was back when I kind of first started. And suddenly, out of nowhere, this is just how fast it can turn, one of my players said, I'm down. And it took a whole table by surprise, including me. And that's just something that doesn't really happen in a lot of other TTRPGs, where you're kind of a lot more aware of when someone's very low. It can just turn like that in Daggerheart, and depending on your outlook, this is either a good or a bad thing. For me, I love it, because it truly is, I don't know what's going to happen next. This was not a deliberate, predetermined thing. This was not something that I was incredibly aware of as a GM. I probably could have been, but I was kind of choosing not to be, almost, because I was playing to find out what happened. So when I had an adversary attack this person, and this person was like, I'm gonna have to make a death move now, I, as a GM, was like, oh, what? I can't believe that just happened. It was as much a surprise for me. It really was playing to find out what happened. I loved it. But there was this moment of the whole table where we were like, oh no, this player's going down. They've just lost their character. And just before they were making the decision of what death move to make, our guardian stepped in and took the attack and saved the life of this other player. And it was just this moment where I was like, that was a twist and turn. They narrated this heroic, almost death and saving in this moment, which was just, I don't know, it felt so satisfying to be a GM GM and to watch this play out. I saw a player go from, very like, oh yeah, we're in a combat, to their life flashing before their eyes, to another player getting this hero moment where they step in the way. And we had this moment where we were trying to work out the distance and could they do it, and they could just do it. And it was very epic. And honestly, if I had been thinking too much about balancing in that moment, if I had been thinking too much about balancing before the combat and during the combat, and if I was incredibly aware of just keeping everything very specific, I don't think that moment would have happened. So my point here is, I think for my playstyle personally, it might be different for you and it might be different for your players. For my playstyle on my table, literally letting go a little bit of it all and just not being in control, and that means sometimes having unbalanced encounters a little bit, makes for a better game. I don't think it does in other systems with like a more strict initiative or more combat rules, just because when things get more strict, there's a feeling that things need to be more fair. It's a one-to-one. And I do feel like Daggerheart's kind of more focus on the narrative, and you use the rules only when you think it aids the narrative. This ends up for more epic moments rather than more balanced, fair moments that other TTRPGs may prioritize. Anyway, let's jump back to past Phil. I'll be back in this form in a minute to give more context, but yeah. And then the other time where I kind of learned a lesson was I did a combat again, and at the end of it, I looked and everyone had like a quarter of their HP left still. And I was asking the players, how did that feel? Do you guys want this more difficult? And these are players who like a challenge. And they all said, no, that was good. Because even though they weren't close to death, because they also know that it can turn like that, they spend combat on their toes all the way through. It's like more tense for players in Daggerheart than it is in D&D. And in D&D, my idea is like for good like combat to happen, like a big one, a big like end of an arc, big bad guy combat, I want all the players close to death. Like I want the potential to be there, right? And so you're hitting them as hard as possible. Go, go, go. But in Daggerheart, the stakes, it feels much higher, and they might take a stress, and they might take mark 1 HP, and they might mark 1 armor slot. And even though they've got tons of resources of all of them, because they've lost all 3, they're sweating from that point all the way to the end. It's like worse for them in a good way. It's tense. That's been my experience anyway. So it's balancing is honestly with Daggerheart, I've stopped worrying so much about balancing encounters beforehand, and I have just become, with experience, you just get very good at balancing them during the game with the amount of fear you spend and what kind of moves you take and how many adversaries you spotlight per turn and all that stuff. You actually have a lot of control over how hard you're hitting and when to bring it back and all that stuff. Are we heading to a man bun? You mean my hair? A while from now. But no, I'm getting a cussing. I feel I end up with a lot of fear most of the time. Are you doing combat a lot? I think for me, if I feel like I've got a lot of fear and I've had it for a while, that's a sign for me to throw some combat into the mix or throw some kind of environment with traps and things that use fear. That's probably my biggest advice for any Daggerheart GM who wants to spend more fear and also add variety, is to use environments where you can spend fear, because it's not combat, but players can still lose resources, and it can just be fun to have them like explore somewhere where they're tense and on edge and setting off traps, or rocks are falling and they've got to avoid it, and doing reaction rolls and stuff. Don't worry about it is the answer. You can't kill them without their permission. Yeah, but sometimes might not be the best for the story and the narrative if you go unbalanced and go too hard. And also, they can still choose not to die, but they could still take a scar, and that's probably the worst possible outcome. Hey, just wanted to join for a second and say thank you for your Daggerheart content. I hope you'll go as big as Daggerheart goes. Thank you, user HY1JX1OE6X. But Blaze of Glory is a win for the story, only if you make it count. Like, one of my biggest issues with like freaking Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon now is that there's no poetic justice to some deaths. And I think someone taking Blaze of Glory when a fight just didn't need to happen with a bunch of filler NPCs who don't mean anything, I see that as that's a pity. It's a waste of a big moment in my eyes. Okay, I just want to jump in here again to talk about the idea that I've seen a lot of people saying about death moves, that in Daggerheart you can just choose not to die. And I want to specifically focus on the fact here that while that's true, you can take a scar, which means that you are nerfed for the rest of the campaign. You lose resources on your character sheet, and the more times you do it, the more resources you potentially lose. Now, it's hard to take a scar, but the risk is there. It's a little bit of a gamble. But also, I think people are looking at the avoid death move as a get out of jail free card. Like, you don't do the thing that the narrative wants you to do, because people see character death as this really cool, epic, potentially moment. But for me, at my table, the idea of hitting 0 HP and making that decision alone is big enough for like the whole table to have this moment of, oh my god, you know? It still accomplishes the thing. And they may choose avoid death, but for that player, they're going through it, you know? And then for me, you know, a good Daggerheart GM and a good Daggerheart player doesn't just say, okay, avoid death, it's all good. That, even if they don't take a scar, that moment has implications for their character narratively and for their character development, because now they pretty much died. They came so close to dying. That can be so impactful on the character and the story in a way that actually having your character die and re-rolling a new character, that is kind of a scapegoat, you know, because then they get to start fresh without any of the trauma. I also just don't think many people take that avoid death moment. No one's taken it at my table yet. So I don't know. I just don't see it as a problem as I think some people kind of do. I also think there's kind of a pseudo new death move that's in the game that is, if a character dies, they can take the death move, but they can also choose to come back as either a ghost or a reanimated. They can use transformation cards like that if they have unfinished business or they want to keep playing that character, and you can give them a really cool twist. And I just don't think that getting to the point where you hit 0 HP and you make a death move means that that's the end of that character's journey. And I don't think people should expect that. I think it just means that it's a big moment, whether you avoid death or you come back in some way, that's going to change the character forever. I think the issue comes when the GM and the players just brush it off and they're just like happy-go-lucky, oh, I almost died, it's fine. And I obviously think it's a huge problem if you ever have a table where someone that just thinks they're invincible, who cares, and keeps trying to go down for no reason because they can just avoid death. Sometimes as a GM, and I know the players, and especially the player playing it, they want to see the end of that character's story, and they don't want it to be here because they have unfinished business. They have epic moments still to come. There's so many more stories to tell with that character. So I think the avoid death option, or the option to come back, is actually incredibly important, and it should be celebrated that it's there, not kind of mocked like I see some people doing, like as if it doesn't matter. I think it actually matters a lot. Anyway, back to the stream. A lot of fear, escalate. Yeah, I do agree with that. I do think using the fear meter, like how much fear you have, as a way to see, or as a way for the game to communicate to you when you should be taking harder moves or not, is a good way. So if you have very low fear, it's because you're probably going too hard on the fear and your players are rolling very well. So chill, you know, make things a little bit easier for them. They deserve it. They're rolling well and you've already spent your fear. So the game doesn't need it right now. If you got too much fear, it's because your players are rolling badly and you're not spending enough, which is the game telling you, let's up the ante here. And if you just follow that pattern, you'll end up with like an ebb and flow, an up and down of complications and I guess conflict that I think gives you a really good balance. Haunted Heathen Gaming, you're about to have an interesting one tomorrow night. They're about to deal with an incoming horde of hundreds of zombies, and they have 8 days to either convince religious zealots to evacuate or somehow divert the horde. More like incoming natural disaster situation. That sounds freaking awesome. Magus, you hate Blaze of Glory. It's limp. I like Febby Ultima's death move. Sacrifice. You are unkillable for the rest of the scene and you get done what you need to do, but at the end of the scene you die. You're a Boromir protecting the hobbits. Of the scene though? So you just be there for the whole like combat and then you just die? Now I like Blaze of Glory. It's very anime to me. It's very like this one moment where you push past the pain and you push past the fact that you're on death's door and you do one last epic thing, and that can happen at the very start of combat or the very end of combat. Yeah, I think my camera is actually going to overheat. I'm getting a warning and it feels like a good place to leave it, guys.